Alright, hey guys, so I'm back from Japan and I have a bunch of games that I'd like to show you guys and talk about. Rather than do just one huge video and just show you the game and move on to the next, I decided I'm going to break it up by system, and today's video is going to be for the Sega Saturn along with some gameplay of each game. So what do you say we get started with the first game? Battle Garegga. This is known as being one of the more pricey games in the Sega Saturn's Japanese library, but with very good reason. I can definitely see why many people would call this their favorite shooter of all time. In fact, the Shoot 'em Up fan forums ranks this as the #1 shooter according to fan feedback in the Shoot 'em Up forum. But it's not my personal favorite, but I can definitely see why. I really like the mechanic of picking up more power-ups and making the difficulty of the game increasingly harder in terms of enemy bullet patterns and such, and the less pickups that you get in terms of powering up your weapon, the easier the game is. It's this really delicate balance between how hard do you want the game to be, but also how powered up do you want your ship to be. So it's a really impressive looking game as well. The visuals are just drop-dead amazing. The particle effects, the huge enemy ships, just the detail in this game is astounding. I definitely wouldn't call it my favorite Saturn shooter by any means, but I can really see why so many people love this game, and Battle Garegga for the Sega Saturn is definitely worth checking out. Next, we have Volk Slash, a game that I have been dying to add to my collection for quite some time, and it was only $15. What a great deal. This is a third-person mech game that will probably remind many of you of, say, maybe a Virtual On or a Robotech, or maybe even a little bit of a Zone of the Enders feel, or you know, something like that. It's a really fun game, and I would highly recommend this to anybody that's a fan of third-person action games. The controls definitely take some getting used to, but once you get them down in terms of turning the camera and piloting your mech, this game is so much fun. It's really a quick pick-up-and-play arcade game. The levels are really fairly short. You're just going around shooting target enemies that you have to kill, and then a boss appears at the end and you have to try and defeat them. The visuals are really good for the Saturn. I absolutely love the mech itself and its pre-rendered graphics. The environments look really great. You know, the Saturn isn't the best at putting out 3D environments, but for how fast-paced this game is, I think it does a really good job. It has a rockin' soundtrack, great visuals, controls that take some getting used to, but I think fans of arcade-style mech action games will really enjoy Volk Slash. Next up, we have Steam Hearts, a shooter that at its best is fairly mediocre, but it has something else going on for it that will probably catch a lot of people's interests. If you're not familiar with this game, I'm going to go ahead and show it to you. So the gameplay itself is actually fairly standard for a scrolling shooter. There's a lot going on screen. It's honestly not the greatest game, but it's not a terrible one either. The gameplay is fast and frantic. There's not a lot of order in terms of the way they throw enemies at you. It just seems very over the top and overly chaotic at times. But the power-ups are fun, and honestly, the game looks pretty good. The Saturn version has a leg up on the PC Engine version as well. But the thing that really makes this game stand out from other games on the Saturn and other shooters in general, well, official games, not, you know, third-party or doujin-style shooters, is the fact that this is a hentai shooter. Yes, Steam Hearts, for those of you that don't know, includes scenes like this. And yes, it's a bit awkward for, you know, a shooting game, but honestly, there's something quite odd about it that makes Steam Hearts interesting to play. I don't know. Honestly, it's not a terrible game. The cutscenes are overly long. I have no idea what they're saying, to be honest, but I probably don't want to know anyway. But Steam Hearts on the Sega Saturn. GVector is a fairly overlooked gem that I've been after for quite a while, and this game right away will remind you of a Star Fox, or most importantly, a Panzer Dragoon style game. It's on rails, you have a lock-on laser just like Panzer Dragoon, and you can fire bullets sort of like a machine gun. However, you cannot pan the camera around such as a Panzer Dragoon game. You are completely locked onto a straight-on rails game. First of all, this game is incredibly difficult. I have struggled to beat the second level The boss just annihilated me. I couldn't do it. But the game has some amazing visuals. This is some of the best visuals I have seen on the Sega Saturn. The music is catchy as well, and it really adds to the game. The controls are a bit wonky, they're kind of stiff, but once you get used to them, the game can be kind of fun, but unfortunately, it's fairly brutal in its difficulty as well. But it's worth tracking down for fans of on-rail shooters. Necronomicon is one of the few pinball games available on the Sega Saturn, and despite being almost entirely in English and completely playable by non-Japanese speaking audiences, it remained exclusive to Japan. And it even had 3 songs by John Petrucci, who is most well known for being a member of the band Dream Theater. He actually did 3 songs in this game. And it's actually a pretty good game. It has 3 different tables. The physics, well, I don't play a lot of pinball games, but they feel pretty good to me in terms of ball physics and, you know, hitting the ball and having it go where I want it to. It's pretty fun, and I really like the sort of dark, horror-esque overtone to it with all the different tables and the music and everything. It's definitely a game that's worth checking out for fans of pinball, and that's Necronomicon Digital Pinball. Next we have a shooter that many regard as one of their favorites, and that is Shion Ryu. And this is a game that is actually available in America. However, you don't want to get this version, and that's Garegga Shooting King. This game is not that good. It's sort of a downscaled version that, when I played it at least, has absolutely no background music, and we all know that in a shooting game, you need background music. But getting down to it, this is one amazing shooter. Unfortunately, the music that's actually in this version is fairly lackluster. However, the gameplay completely makes up for it, and it has one of the absolute best weapons I've ever played in a shooting game, and that is this amazing lightning bolt. The only thing that rivals it is maybe the lightning in Lords of Thunder on the Sega CD or PC Engine, but man, this game has some really great gameplay, and it's worth checking out. It's one of the cheaper shooters on the import Saturn. It's available also on the PlayStation 2 in a compilation with a game I think is called Dragon Blaze, but the most affordable and the best version to get is right here on the import Saturn. Next is a game called Hissatsu, and this is worth tracking down if you're a fan of side-scrolling action games. It's a bit slower paced than, say, a Shinobi or Strider type game, but it has one cool mechanic that'll actually make it pretty appealing because you don't really see this too much in action games. You have a choice between 4 different characters, and you can choose 2 to bring with you every time that you enter into the gameplay. And each one plays vastly different than the other, and each one has a different weapon and a power attack. And depending on who you choose will make levels much easier or much harder. I particularly like this guy here with this chain whip. He makes defeating most of the enemies fairly trivial. The other characters are pretty challenging, but I really like the fact that you can choose between 4 different characters to bring with you. It's a bit slower paced, the hit detection and the controls are not the best. However, fans of side-scrolling action games would definitely owe it to themselves to check out Hissatsu. Alright, next is a game from a fairly infamous series, and that is Cho Aniki on the Saturn. And I have to say, this is my first Cho Aniki game, and I'll let the gameplay speak for itself. This is a side-scrolling shooter which features a lot of masculinity and muscles. It's a very odd series. Yes, all the other games in the series look similar to this, though this one's graphics are a bit different than the other games in the series. They're a bit more pre-rendered. However, whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'll leave that up to you. At first I had a hard time grasping the hitboxes in this game. It was actually fairly difficult at first. But down to the core, it's actually not that good of a game. The gameplay is pretty sluggish. The enemies get a lot of cheap hits in. The power-ups are fairly uninteresting. However, I didn't buy this for the gameplay. I bought it for the novelty of playing one of the strangest series out there and one of the strangest shooters on the Sega Saturn, Cho Aniki. I'm sure the gameplay speaks for itself. Next is a title that I've been dying to add to my collection for quite some time, and it does not disappoint, and that's Elevator Action Returns, and this game is amazing. If you're a fan of arcade-style 2D shooters, you have to pick this game up. It has, first of all, amazing animation. The enemies and the characters that you play as and all the explosions and backgrounds all animate incredibly well. It's some of the best I've seen in 2D games. The gameplay is fairly simple. You just have to move around, kill the enemies, pick up different weapon power-ups, go through certain doors before the time expires, and make it to the end of the level. It's challenging, it's hard, it's fun, it's addictive, it's simple. It's just the right combination of, you know, almost perfected arcade gameplay. I think it's worth checking out if you have the means of playing import Saturn games. You won't be disappointed. Next we have Wizardry LLYLGAMYN. I'm not even going to attempt it. Saga. Wizardry on the Sega Saturn. What this is, it's the first 3 Wizardry games with a graphical overhaul, and all 3 games are included on one disc. But what makes this special, aside from the graphical update, is the fact that, well, it was never released outside of Japan, but don't let that deter you from playing it, because the game is actually 90% in English. And you can totally play it, because the only thing that won't be in English are some menu descriptions and spell descriptions. However, you can just go online and look up the translation of the spell descriptions, so everything else is completely playable. Fans of old school dungeon crawlers, you'll want to give this a try, but go into this knowing that this is a pretty challenging, I wouldn't say dated, because it has an updated graphic engine, but it's incredibly difficult. But I really enjoy Wizardry-style dungeon crawlers, and I'm excited to give this a try. Terra Cresta 3D. Luckily, I got this game fairly cheap because, in all honesty, it's a pretty okay game. It's not the greatest, it's not good, it's not bad. It's got some interesting gimmicks going on for it that not many shooters pull off, and that is, you can go from a 2D side-scrolling game with 3D polygonal graphics into a sort of behind-the-view, typical third-person shooter. But don't think it gets better when it goes into this sort of behind-the-ship view. It actually gets worse. The bullets are really hard to detect where they're coming from. And when it's not in that view, the other way is not any better. The enemy bullet patterns are boring. Honestly, the coolest thing about it is this like fire phoenix that you can shoot out for your bomb. But other than that, it's a fairly standard shooter that is not really worth checking down unless you're a hardcore shooter fan for the Sega Saturn. And last is Gunbird, another 2D shooter that is a bit more well known in the US as Mobile Light Force. But it's not really known for the actual game, it's more known for the odd box art that it received in the US with some Charlie's Angel inspired characters. Same game, oddly enough. It's actually a pretty good shooter. It only cost me a few dollars, so I figured, well, I might as well add it to the collection, and it was definitely worth it. Well guys, that'll about do it for the Saturn games that I picked up while I was in Japan. Look forward to a PC Engine video, PlayStation 1 video, Super Famicom video, and more in the future. So, as always guys, thanks for watching.